Most of you have braved this very foggy conditions to be present here dot on time. I appreciate your effort and your sincerity in this regard. A warm welcome to you once again, Professor Shawal, on behalf of all of us who are here. So today is the third day of our 10-day course. The past 2 days have generated a lot of excitement, and I'm sure today is also not going to be any different. Today's lecture is on institutionalizing the post-Cold War Asia, and in fact, the tutorial poses a very interesting question. Are institutions, especially regional ones, still relevant? So the discussion would be around this question. The lecture hour, which will just begin in a couple of minutes from now, is of 1 hour duration, followed by a tea break of 12 minutes. Please have your tea and snacks and return to the room as soon as possible. When I say as soon as possible, after 12 minutes, I'll bring you all in. And I request all of you to be very regular, because the learning outcome of this particular course, in fact all courses, depends heavily on how sincere and regular you are. So the 1 hour lecture begins now, followed by the tea break, and we again reassemble. Thank you so much. Over to you, Professor Shawal.
Thank you very much, Professor Upadhyay. The microphone is not on. Is it? Thank you very much. Yes. Good morning to all. Namaste. Again, thank you for your presence. And I wish to begin by expressing again my gratefulness formally to the GIAN and the GNU authorities, but informally as well, very sincerely for this chance to interact with you and have my views challenged, which I have had for the first 2 days, informally during the tea breaks with colleagues and students, and we are going to pick up some points as we go along. I wish to suggest, or at least from my part, I'm more than open to questions that may be coming from online viewers, whether in written forms or in oral forms. That is to me a technicality, but of course everyone is welcome to, by questions, challenge my views. So let me summarize what I have been trying to do on Monday and Tuesday already, under the main umbrella of the question: how to make sense of the new Central Asia, how to make sense of the new Asia. And already there is a discussion with my colleagues as to whether I should use the expression the new Central Asia or the new Asia. And I understand there is a formal difference, a huge formal difference between the two expressions, but in terms of geopolitical potential, which is my approach, there is a proximity of views, a changing scale of phenomena, which is what I mean when I mix the two expressions. And I don't mix them because I'm confused. I mix them on purpose because I wish to deal both with the existing dynamic and the potential dynamic. So I try to mix approaches coming from epistemology, history, realpolitik or real diplomacy, and also contextual analysis. I haven't used the expression contextual analysis until now, but what is meant by contextual analysis is the fact that events taking place in one part of the world are related somehow or caused by or causing events happening elsewhere in the world. The easiest way to illustrate this is to say that there is a way in which the post-Cold War is the context of the emergence of the new Asia. But there are so many elements of context that come into play, of course, for events taking place in one particular region or sub-region. So yesterday we focused on what I call peripheral actors, and I justified the word peripheral. And the word periphery comes also in the vocabulary of today and tomorrow. Today we'll focus on what peripheral may mean by way of observer status to the SCO, not focusing strictly on the observer status of countries which you know, but suggesting that there is a sort of dynamic very well constructed, which gradually incorporates countries which I call affiliates into more and more formal and more institutional status. The best example probably is Afghanistan, or now Belarus having been upgraded from partner to observer to member, and so on. So when we use the expression beyond, peripheral, complementary, additional, we're not suggesting words that are a lesser status than the status of members. We are referring to potential dynamics. And I was reflecting this morning when I prepared for the lecture about the term beyond the what? Should we use the word beyond the main actors, beyond the giant actors, beyond the heavyweights of Asia? Yes, but that would be a simplistic view, because formally speaking, or geopolitically speaking, the major change in this region, which occurred in other regions, is that all affiliates or members are equal. This is clearly reminded us in Article Section 2 of the Charter, equality of member states. And this equality, of course, in terms of history, is a bit of a surprise, because some countries are bigger, more powerful, more equipped, more prosperous. But there is a very clear will to certainly turn neighbors into equal partners, not just partners, but equal partners. And this can be picked up by you in any other ways. You can compare GNPs, populations, territories, and suggest that they are so unequal that they cannot be thought ever of being equal, and yet they are, formally speaking, made equal with the idea, more or less, of one country, one vote, which is the motto of democracy, one human or one person, one vote, and it's the same applies to the regional construction. Sometimes this means that the decision-making process is unanimity. Therefore, each country has a right of veto, and so small Luxembourg can veto decisions suggested by much larger Poland or Italy or France. So I can come back to this inequality, real inequality, or artificial, or forceful or decisive equality that is actually put on paper at some point in history. This is really what we are having to understand better. I'll begin today's chapter, if you were kind enough to put the outline on the board for chapter 3, with an introduction which I think should be the key to today's session before we come to the actual discussion of 4 countries. I have suggested in many ways already, using the geometric metaphor, that we are looking at a dynamic of reversal, or inversing dynamics from centrifugal to centripetal. I've used the words before, but this is clearly what has been happening. For a long time, the first great game, as it was called, was the periphery in a centripetal manner trying to dominate the center. We mentioned Mackinder many times. This has been reversed for 2 reasons. First of all, because history showed that the Mackinder aphorism was wrong. The history of the 20th century is not the history of the periphery taking over the center, but the history of the center expanding. Incidentally, through a communist form of regime and a series of communist revolutions. But in geopolitical terms, the nature of the regime matters much less than the actual power dynamic. And so the center tried to expand, starting from the 1917, 1924, 1949, so on, development of the communist bloc, and being contained by the peripheries. And the containment by the peripheries took the form of a series of alliances established between 1949 with NATO until 1953-54 with the Japanese, USA, and Korea-USA defense treaties, containing all around, with the Baghdad Pact, with Seattle, with the ISIS, so on, containing the expanding center. This is the history of the 20th century. 21st century is a history of the center reconstituting itself and not expanding but equalizing with the rest of the world. The new center equalizing with the peripheries. This is really what is the broad framework of my approach, and I said to you yesterday that we are mixing all the time the broad perspective, which is the emerging geopolitical inventions, and the narrow perspective, which is the specificities of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Having said that, for countries gradually to become members and then observers or dialogue partners is the specified dynamic we are looking at. my contention is that we are no longer, and I repeat, engaged in an analysis which tries to decide whether the periphery or the center is going to more or less win over in terms of domination, but in a dynamic where, in many, many different ways and innovative ways, they are becoming, in a sense, part of the New World dynamic. So why call it the new great game is because, as I said yesterday, there are a number of parallel or sometimes competing initiatives regarding Central Asia, whether the Greater Central Asia, the Central Asian Union, or other organizations I've mentioned. And the dynamic is today one whereby the credibility of the new Central Asia is extremely high, and one, interestingly enough, which is either similarly to other dynamics in the world, one aiming for domination or control of the peripheries, but I don't believe that. I believe it's a partnership that is being established, a difficult one, between peripheral power holders and central power holders. So this is the introduction to the chapter 3, and I propose now to look at 4 countries which are particularly relevant because they were very early on affiliated to the Shanghai Cooperation Organization dynamic with the observer status, and some of them having become since then members of the organization, some not having become member, and that hesitation is itself revealing of a number of dynamics. The status of observer and dialogue partner is provided for by section 14 of the Charter, called Relationships with Other States and International Organizations, Dialogue Partners and Observers. One category is missing from the Charter, that is the category of guests to the organization. And I'll come back to that tomorrow. The category of guests was invented or created later on, but for organizations, the CIS, the ASEAN, and the UN, and eventually incorporated Turkmenistan being minimally affiliated to the SCO, but yet not left out. Well, the country has an official doctrine of neutrality, which means not wanting or allowing itself to be a member of any military organization or any security organization, and to the extent to which the SCO is a security organization. So Mongolia, Iran, Pakistan, and India are the countries I'm going to talk about now. The dates are known to you, I'm sure. They are also on the screen. Mongolia was the first to be offered and accepted the status of observer in June 2004, and then the next year 3 countries, India, Iran, Pakistan, received or accepted the same status. So for each of these countries, I suggest to reflect upon the nuances or the shades or the differences as to the meaning of observer status. I do not, from the start, consider them as one homogeneous category. I say for each of them there is a main focus to be looked at, a regional focus, the word is in red I think on the screen, yes, for Mongolia, a tactical focus for Iran, and a strategic focus for Pakistan, and a maturing focus for India, at least until 2015 as is indicated on the screen. Could you scroll down just now so that the viewers can see the paragraphs and then focus on the first one. I would try in each case to qualify the word indicated in red, and also to balance out the reasons for wanting to be in and the reasons for preferring to stay out of the observer or member status, and suggesting that the balance between the reasons to wanting to keep out or for coming in are extremely revealing of the country's foreign policy vis-à-vis the region and vis-à-vis the founding members of China and Russia. Mongolia, I think, can be characterized as having more reasons to remain out of a more committed or more committing status of member and remain an observer than reasons for wanting to be in. The reason for that is, on the one hand, the history of Mongolia, which is more comfortable remaining out of the landlocked pressure that it feels sometimes in history from China or sometimes more from Russia, and to remain, if possible, out of a full commitment which is perceived by the Mongols as a commitment as member which would be unequal. The belief that Mongolia would be an equal partner to Russia and China is historically difficult to take into account. But the main reason today is the third neighbor policy, which I have mentioned yesterday, and the idea that a third neighbor policy is not compatible with the status of a full member. Of course, legally it is compatible, but geopolitically it is perceived as less compatible. And clearly Mongolia, having accepted early on the status of observer, hesitating a lot, as I said yesterday, is really now the one country which is letting time pass most before considering the status of a full member. It's been 20 years since the moment when Mongolia became a observer and the moment when we speak today. So remaining out of the full membership and contending with being an observer is a position that enables Mongolia to privilege the sustainable policy, especially towards developed countries in the region. As I said yesterday, Japan, South Korea, and other countries of East Asia and Asia, Southeast Asia, South Asia, and of course Europe and the USA. Similarly, Mongolia hesitated also before joining the APEC, the ASEM, and other forms of dynamics. From the point of view of Mongolia, being in the Shanghai dynamic, being possibly one day a full member of the organization, would be, as I said before, exposing itself to reverting to traditional domination either from one or the other of the two countries. The extra dimension, which is of course very relevant here, is the nuclear question regarding Mongolia. Mongolia was a very interesting case of a country that negotiated and granted for itself from the UN in New York the status of nuclear-free zone. The status of nuclear-free zone was granted to Mongolia in the year 2000, unless I'm wrong, and it's a very interesting example of a one-country zone, expressing by this move, which was picked up later on in 2006 by the Central Asia countries, adopting the Semipalatinsk Treaty of Denuclearization, that Mongolia wanted to remain out of the nuclear characteristics of Russia and China. Incidentally, Mongolia was having to cope with the fact that nuclear tests took place for a long time near the Mongolian borders, and so the nuclear-free status included not only nuclear weapons or nuclear facilities, but also nuclear wastes in the neighboring countries. So you see, all these aspects come in the question of whether to accept or not a status of observer or a status of full member. It's not just it's not a technical question. It's a question that really does mobilize history, geopolitics, cultural perception, and the concern for existing on its own right. I don't have time now, but I could go through the story of how direct air links between Ulhan-Bator and capital cities outside Russia and China were negotiated. It's a very long process. I happen to have discussed this with the first ambassador to the UN, and it's a very interesting story. So Mongolia, from the point of view of Mongolia, of course, we could argue that there is a determination based on the answer to the Mongolian answer to the question of what to do. What to do with independence, what to do with the Cold War, and what to do is basically be both in some degree of proximity with Russia and China, and yet be as much as possible also in the proximity with third neighbors. Very, very specific situation. Now, why Mongolia first? Why Mongolia a year before India, Iran, and Pakistan? I think it is because, and we'll come back to this for other countries, there is also implicitly a reading of the reasons why such and such status is offered to such and such country, balancing out Chinese priorities and Russian priorities. We can mention this for the other countries. But Mongolia is in between. It's sort of test admission, which is, of course, both China's and Russia's suggestion that Mongolia should be part of the new dynamic, part of the Shanghai dynamic, and not left out. I think there was some degree of agreement among Russia and China as to the offering of the status of observer to Mongolia. For other countries, and I'll come to Iran just now, we can see for the observers I'm going to mention now, and then later on for the dialogue partners, in a way, it's not an exact science, but in a way, each country mentioned as observer or a partner corresponds to China's preference or Russia's preference, balancing out among the two. Now, Iran is a country I mentioned under the umbrella of tactical considerations, and Iran's eagerness to join as not just observer, but as full member since 2005. And first, in fact, in a way, immediately Iran was offered the status of observer, Iran expressed the following year a desire to be a full member of the SCO in due course, and probably early on, if possible. There are definitely more reasons for wanting to be in than reasons for wanting to remain out, and presumably very few reasons for wanting to remain out of the Shanghai dynamic. Why? Because, and why is this a tactical situation and an eagerness on the part of Iran? Because, as I explained to you many times before, joining the SCO with whatever status is a way to come out of isolation for Iran, isolation since 1979. There are strategic reasons for wanting to come in and diplomatic reasons for wanting to come in on the part of Iran. Iran tried many, many times to come out of isolation, and I use the word isolation not as with a connoted meaning, but as a factual characterization. Iran, following the events of 1979 and after that, tried many times to enter the Gulf Cooperation Council, being a Gulf country, being an oil producer, and so on, and was denied access as a member of the Gulf Cooperation Council. As a consequence, Iran created its own organization with some neighbors, which is the Economic Cooperation Organization, in 1985, with countries of the region, including, if I'm not mistaken, Iraq and Turkey and others. But that organization, which still exists, was not as effective as Iran hoped for creating a multilateral dynamic, competing with or equalizing or neighboring other regional organizations based on economic or energy sectors. And so, in a sense, in a way, but I'm here to take your questions. The microphone is still sliding down. I don't know why. It's maybe wary of me. But the only alternative, quote unquote, only, or one proper or really alternative was the Shanghai dynamic. And this is why Iran's eagerness was expressed in many, many ways. Iran suggested many times to the SCO members to become a full member, and was not denied that possibility, but the possibility was delayed with the argument that there was no specific provisions within the SCO yet to monitor applications and candidacies into the full member status. So in other words, the SCO never denied the possibility to Iran, but suggested that there was a need to wait until the procedure for admission was clarified. And it was clarified in 2010. implicitly in between the lines, the reason was that the Iranian situation vis-à-vis the West over the nuclear issue was tensed, unclear, and so this led 5 years later to the idea that any country applying for the SCO should not be under international sanctions, should not be under international tensions. I've said to you this to you before. So to present things in the simplest possible way, regarding Iran, there are, in fact, no real reason why Iran should have hesitated to apply for membership status, nor many reasons why the member states should have hesitated to grant in due course the status of a full member to Iran. Now we know how much historically loaded the expression in due course is. The Koreans know how much loaded it is from the Cairo conference that was not followed by a unification of decolonized Korea. But for Iran, this is what I would contend. Now, of course, we know today that the membership status was granted only in 2021. So in many, many ways, much later. But time is compressible. Time is compressible. Once something is achieved, the time factor becomes very, very relative. What matters is not the time elapsed between 2005 or 10 or 21. What matters is the fact that Iran has an Asianized option, which is now pursued, which is now secured. And incidentally, but I come back to this in a later chapter, the territory of Iran is an ideally located territory linking the SCO Asia to West Asia and the west of the continent and the maritime spaces of the Gulf in particular. So Iran is a very interesting example. Now, as to my question whether Iran's was Russia's priority or China's priority, I think in a sense, similarly to Mongolia, it was a priority, or at least an agreed extension of the SCO. And by the way, I wish to use the word extension, not the word expansion. And if my tongue slips, please correct me. Now, when we come to Pakistan and Iran now, when we come to Pakistan and Iran, I think we are beginning to be able to illustrate, and let's deal with it very quickly now. It's not the main point. To illustrate this issue of the preference or the priority for China or for Russia. Clearly, I think, in this audience, it's a simplistic view to suggest, the Pakistani observer status is something which China was in favor of, and the Indian observer status was something that Russia was in favor of. So I think there is a way of balancing out the two countries, China and Russia, through the countries that become gradually observers or dialogue partners. And we'll come back to this immediately next session. We'll mention Belarus and Sri Lanka. So Pakistan's, I use the expression strategic priority, and the relevance for Pakistan's strategic priorities since 2005 to be an observer status to the SCO. Definitely more reasons for wanting to be in from the point of view of Pakistan than reasons for wishing perhaps to stay out of the dynamic. Let me tread very carefully here on diplomatic and international grounds. I think the main dimension which is relevant here is that the SCO dynamic offered Pakistan a diversification and opening up of diplomatic horizons. In a sense, but not, of course, similarly, in the dynamic which characterizes Iran, but also from the point of view of Pakistan, and I mentioned this to you, I think yesterday, in the book that we did together, there was this idea that Pakistan was on the lookout for a role to play. I'm not sure what the expression "a role to play" means, but definitely a great role to play within the region, within the new region of Central Asia and post-Cold War Asia. there was little hesitation on the part of Pakistan, which similarly to Iran, after 2005 becoming observer, applied for full membership, which was granted in 2015, so 10 years later. Clearly, I think, to me, there was a matchmaking that occurred between the idea that Pakistan wanted to play an extra-ideal or renewed role in the region, and the fact that China was looking for ways to extend the Shanghai dynamic west. To extend it west meant, from the point of view of the location of China, Iran and Pakistan, and later on Turkey and the Middle East. The difference between Iran and Pakistan is that Pakistan was already a very well inserted trading partner to countries of Asia and countries of the West. Pakistan was not in a state of isolation, which Iran was in. Now, to suggest that there is also a way in which the Shanghai dynamic is a is an opening, a more active opening to more active organizations, because other organizations of which Pakistan is a member are much less active or not very active at all. For example, SAARC, South Asia Association for Regional Cooperation, which on paper looks like the proper sub-regional forum for the members of SAARC to be actively together in trading, commercial, economic, and other political cooperation. SAARC is inactive or dormant or insufficiently active. We may look for the right words, which is not a criticism of SAARC on my part. We know of other dormant or inactive organizations, as far as I'm concerned, the West European Union, of which no one really knows much, among students anyway, created in 1948, the same year as the Benelux and the year before NATO, which was a European military ambition. 6 years before the launch and the failure of the European Defence Community, the West European Union never picked up. It was never active, although it remained alive and had meetings and so on, until eventually some provisions of the West European Union were incorporated into the new European Treaty of Maastricht in the late 90s. So to say that SAARC is inactive is not to be taken as a criticism, please, but just as a fact. So for Pakistan, member of also the Economic Cooperation Organization with Iran, the Shanghai dynamic offered a more promising, a more active, a more potentially thriving one than the other existing dynamics. Pakistan being, in a simplistic formulation, now a country or a observer with the clear support of China. When we come to India now, the question is more complex and potentially rich, and I'm not saying this because I'm teaching you here in this room in India. I call it India's maturing positions since 2005. Not to suggest before 2005 Indian diplomacy is immature, but to suggest that there is a concretization of India's position. I prefer to call it maturing than to call it, which many other observers have, the wait-and-see attitude. The wait-and-see attitude, I think, is a less honoring expression. India's why maturing? Because India had other options, has other options, and the Shanghai dynamic, or the New Asia's dynamic, or the Continental Asia's dynamic, is only one of the options. There was no comparison possible between Iran's and Pakistan's eagerness or lookout or determination to explore a new avenue without which Iranian diplomacy or Pakistani diplomacy would have been curtailed. India had other alternative positions, and located in a way which later on clearly is the reason why I said in my introduction on Monday that the new Asia was merging of Central Asia, East Asia, North Asia, and South Asia. India brings in South Asia, in a sense, much more than Sri Lanka and more than Pakistan in the geopolitical analysis. And I repeat, in the geopolitical analysis, not in any other form of analysis. So India accepted or was granted the status of observer in 2005 from the point of view of the other members and Russia and China to balance out Pakistani observer status, obviously, with the fact that Russia and India implicitly, if you read between the lines, and we'll do so more tomorrow, support or express a wish or agree to a country becoming observer or partner, balancing out the other country. I've said this 3 times or 4 times to you this morning already, but I think it's very important to understand this because it is reality, I think, in many, many ways, and also because it echoes in a more analytical way the idea that China and Russia dominate or dominated within the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. I'm always hesitant to use the word domination without the facts of domination. Heavyweights, giants, whatever, means something, but doesn't mean something as interesting as the capacity to deal with the rivalry, the Chinese-Russian rivalry, indirectly through constructive and positive dynamics such as the extension of the SCO. So India's position was characterized as a wait-and-see attitude, sometimes as an indifferent attitude to the Shanghai dynamic, and for 10 years. For 10 years, unless I'm wrong, but you are the experts, from 2005 to 2015, India was an observer to the SCO without much enthusiasm or without much activism. But something happened in 2015, I'm not quite sure what it was, that certainly produced a U-turn on the position and the application of India and the granting of the status in 2015. Whatever happened at least a year before, because it takes a year for diplomats to negotiate something at least. So something happened in 2014, 2013, which justifies the U-turn of 2015. I think what happened is, first of all, domestic elections, of which you are the experts, but also what happened is a series of initiatives taken by China and other countries, one of them being the new Silk Roads. Xi Jinping's speech in Nazarbayev University is 2013, if I'm not wrong, and his ensuing speech in Indonesia is a few weeks later. So that happened at that time. What also happened in 2013-14 is the stance of Russia over Ukraine and Crimea. So all this is part of the contextual analysis which we ought to take into consideration. And if we looked further, I'm sure we'd find some other major dynamics taking place elsewhere in the world, in America, in Europe, in Africa, and things also did happen over there. So something happened in the early 2010s, change of government, crisis, ambitions, and so on. So things changed. And the anecdote I have for you, which is, I don't know if it's interesting or not, but is my brief discussion in the elevator of Sciences Po building, going from the lecture hall to the administration floor with some ambassador, I'm not going to say which, and putting the question to that ambassador: why would India hesitate or delay or wait before suggesting to go from observer to full member? That was in the spring of 2015, only a few weeks before it happened. And the answer I received was very interesting. It was to say, "Oh, but India is probably much willing to become a full member, but China is hesitating or delaying," which I found interesting because it was such a classic view. But in between the lines, the answer I was getting to my question was not, India is not considering, India is going to delay more, India is definitely not that interested in joining the SCO as a full member. But it did, indeed, and that marked, as I said many times to you before, the beginning of the next SCO, the SCO number 2. It also marked a dynamic by which the extension of the SCO was accelerated. 10 members, more or less 10 dialogue partners were affiliated to the SCO in just the following years. From 2017 to 2022, that's more or less 5 years. The number of dialogue partners doubled. So definitely there is I'm looking for the right word, energizing or acceleration of the Shanghai dynamic following 2015-17, following the accession of India and Pakistan to the status of, and Iran to the status of observers. Now, whether for India the discussion should be on the strategic aspects or the economic aspects, I think matters less than the fact that in my question of today, the reasons for coming in or the reasons for staying out are almost equal. They sort of neutralize each other, which means, as a form of conclusion, that differently from Mongolia, Pakistan, and Iran, 3 countries for which there is definitely a stake in being or not being an observer or a member. For India, there is less so of a stake, or if there is a stake, it's not a dominant stake. The second point of conclusion is that this not creation but activation of the status of observer in 2004 and 5, before the activation of the status of partner in 2009 to Belarus and Sri Lanka, marks a way in which the SCO itself is maturing. The SCO itself is maturing and changing its nature from basically being a border tension management forum, which it was under the name the Shanghai Five from 96 to 2001, which then it was still to a large extent after 2001, to a forum, to a security forum in the broader sense of the term. It's interesting that at the same time as the 2001 formal creation of the SCO marks the lessening of the joint border factor, the fact of having a common border with China was the determining criterion at the very beginning for forming something called the Shanghai Group, called later on. That was lifted as a factor, the fact of sharing a border, when Uzbekistan became a member, as I said yesterday. And later on, the contiguity was kept as a factor, but the location of the Shanghai dynamic around Central Asia was totally lifted. Which is why I've said to you, maybe I shocked you when I said that, but that the cartographic analysis is much less relevant than the geopolitical analysis. Because what happened in 2005 and 4 for the observers, and later on for the member states of India and Pakistan and others, is the start of a process where the question which country is going to be next a member or an observer is a question not only that makes sense, but a question that is indispensable. Certainly, the question of whether Afghanistan or Belarus or Turkey would be granted such a status became not only a logical question, but a pressing one. A pressing one. And I repeat that to go from 5-6 affiliates to 26 affiliates between 2001 or 5, depends how you count, to 2021-22 is very fast. I think this is basically the substance matter of what I want to say to you, and I hope that you disagree or put questions regarding the India's case, of course, here. Thank you very much, and let's anticipate on the tea break. notions, I think, for you to take down. And so to the question, can there be a new periphery with or around India? The answer is yes. But the further question is how and why and when and specifically what does it mean? Before we answer the question and before we go into that discussion, I'd like to underline 2 or 3 things which I could have said before the break in the lecture, which I kept for now. When I discussed the idea that China's preferences or Russia's preferences balance out which countries become members or observers or partners, there is one word I haven't used, which I thought you would remind me I should use, is the word, the expression to avoid mistakes. From my comparative perspective, not Eurocentric, but comparative, mistakes were made in the case of the European construction and avoided in the case of the Shanghai construction. One mistake I think we made is to admit Greece without Turkey. And that meant the bilateral tension was kept out, and it meant that since 1981, there's been an imbalance in the presence within the European construction of countries in a strategic region. The paradox, of course, is that Turkey is a member of NATO, but not of the EU, and so on and so forth. In the case of Asia, I think in many, many ways, admitting one or the other, in the case of Pakistan, India, but also in the case of other countries, would have been a mistake, and therefore we can view the events of 2005, observer status to both countries, and 2015, member status to both countries, as an avoidance of a mistake. I don't know whether the expression is accepted by you, or too strong, or too naive, or whatever, but I really believe in the sense that any organizational dynamic being created and being extended should balance out the factors that could, if not, maintain or create an imbalance in the dynamic. There is another thing I should have made perhaps more clear, is the fact that inasmuch as in the 2010s, a number of criteria, hesitations, factors, fine-tunings, or academic diplomatic discussions were taking place and were relevant as to refined reasonings or reasons why to do this or not to do that, have yielded in the 2020s or today to a much more, what's the word we agreed upon, more pragmatic, more all-inclusive, more comprehensive attitude, whereas hesitations are done with. The emphasis is on the acceleration or the systematization of the construction of the continent. And this is why factors which we could develop, which I don't have time for, suggesting to hesitate to include such or such categories of countries are now something, to a large extent, of the past. One example only, which has been mentioned by others and not only by me, is Russia's hesitation to including or admitting too many Muslim new affiliates beyond its near abroad. And that is an argument that is relevant to some extent, which was relevant, I think, in the 2000 and 2010s, but no longer as relevant today. When you look at the list of new dialogue partners, they come from all sorts of regions, the Middle East, the Indian Ocean, the East Mediterranean, the Gulf, irrespective of what my colleague would call cultural factors, or religious factors, and so on. This is important because the moment when the geostrategic, the geopolitical factors take over the cultural or historical ones is meaningful. I think this is happening faster and earlier in your region than in other in other regions. Now, my third point is that particularly as regards bilateral tensions and multilateral tensions, we should do two things. We should consider, as I suggested, but now I can be more specific, that Article 2, subparagraph 1 of the SCO Charter clearly says, with the expression non-interference in internal affairs, that the SCO is not willing to table bilateral issues. And I could have said in my lecture a few minutes ago that one dimension of the Pakistani and Indian observer status being discussed and granted in 2010, in the 2000s, was for one country, Pakistan, to be fairly willing to bring the bilateral tension with India inside the S2 discussions, and the resistance of India to that process. And the solution was in the Charter, clearly from 2002, and simply put into practice later on by non-tabling bilateral issues within the formal SEO discussions. But I said yesterday and Monday, and I say again today willingly, that the more partners or countries meet and discuss informally on the sidelines of the formal meetings, the more conducive it is for easing out solving bilateral tensions. Not only in the case of India and Pakistan, but in the case of a number of situations. Something else I wish to say is that in many, many ways, from the point of view of comparative analysis, not Eurocentric, when I call the SEO dynamic number 2 from 2015, I could also call the European dynamic number 2 from 1972, when we admitted Britain, Denmark and Ireland, and that marked the new beginning of the full scope, of the full range of the European construction. Now for the topic of the new periphery and India's role. And I would like this to be a discussion with you, and if you could focus your questions on the issue of India's interests, India's priorities, India's role, and the vision of the neighbors as to the role of India within the SEO, I would be more than happy. I think we could address the issue not from the point of view of high diplomacy or historical dynamics, but from the point of view of pragmatic energy or logistical analysis. I think part of the dynamics of 2005, where Pakistan and India were given, or where Pakistan as the energy facilitator, an expression I need to make perhaps more clear, but from the point of view of geoeconomics and geopolitics, clearly the fact that the two countries would be or are part of the SEO dynamic at that time was linked to the idea that LNG imports by India would be facilitated crossing the Pakistan territory. This makes obvious pragmatic sense, and my hypothesis, perhaps naive, as I made it clear yesterday already, is that sooner or later that dimension will become a reality. I'm not quite sure through what dynamic. I'm not quite sure whether the TAPI dormant scheme will be reactivated, but that makes absolute sense, because beyond the issue of India, Pakistan and certain countries and the certain relations and their particular forms of interactions, there is an overarching characteristic of the Shanghai dynamic, which is dual. One is the contiguity factor, which I've underlined many, many times. New members, new affiliates, new associates are contiguous neighbors. That's a criteria. That's a criterion. And the other factor is that it is a terrestrial or a land construction. That it makes sense as a construction among neighbors and neighbors on land. It doesn't make sense from the point of view of the whole dynamic. I'm not talking about the fact that India needs to be maritime in many of its imports and exports, but it doesn't make sense from the point of view of the broad dynamic of the Shanghai construction to bypass land connections. There is, from the point of view of China and Russia and Central Asia, clearly a way in which the construction should facilitate the crossing of land borders and facilitating imports and exports of all types of goods, not just energy, by land. We could illustrate this in many, many ways. For example, the long-dating issue of how to cross Mongolia, whether north to south or east to west, to facilitate energy transports, even from Russia to China, is now much easier than before. there was a long hesitation for China to accept the pipelines to go through Mongolia and preferring them to come from Kazakhstan for a number of reasons. This is being to superseded. There's a long effort by China to connect to the Indian Ocean, facilitating railways and other forms of transport through Myanmar and Thailand. So accessing the southern seas is also indirectly a priority of Russia. So constructing a land entity is, I think, a clear priority which we must understand. It might be difficult in the sense that the perfect geography does not exist. In the case of Europe, we have the same situation. We have a continental construction with the British Isles. And the British Isles in history, England in particular, has always been a hesitant a continental sort of partner. We had for a long, long time the motto of European contiguity with Greece, but Greece was only contiguous to the European Union territory in 2007, when Bulgaria and Romania became full members. Until then, Greece was on paper contiguous, but in reality not contiguous. So we're not looking for the perfect situation, but what I'm suggesting here is that the landlock which the territory of Pakistan represents as a territory, I'm not talking about the regime or the diplomacy, but as a territory, that landlock is, I'm looking for the right word, is not logical. And somehow from the point of view of the pressure that geoeconomics and geopolitics exercise on leaders and decision makers, that landlock will someday be, if not lifted, but at least facilitated. And the comparison I made, I think on Monday or Tuesday, between the landlock of the territory of Pakistan and the landlock of the territory of North Korea is of course very touchy or very difficult one. But in geopolitical terms, it is an obvious one. That landlocks at some point or at some other point are lifted. We could take examples of the Caspian Sea, we could take examples of the North Sea, and so on. So all this is, to me, relevant for the discussion of what a new periphery can be, and in the case of India's role in that new periphery. I used the word periphery before, and in my analysis terminology, periphery here means not just, it means not an actor or a country situated further away than the center. It means an actor or a country bringing in an additional dimension to the center. Something quite different. So in many ways you could argue, and I argue, that the new Central Asia, as innovative as it was in the 90s and the 2000s, would have remained limited in its potential and scope had it been contained or restricted to 6 countries. China, Russia, and Central Asian countries. There was a need for extension, a need for further affiliations of countries in order to bring more credibility to the construction, which is in fact not a universal, dangerous word. This is a common characteristic to a number of dynamics in the world, extending membership, increasing membership of an organization. To the extent that I suggest to you to understand and analyze organizations and regions, we should look for 2 factors, one of which I've already mentioned: the fact that membership is conceived of as open, and secondly, the fact that increase in membership is fast or slow or accelerated. You can look at any region of your preference, whether Southeast Asia, or Central Asia, or the Shanghai Asia, or the European construction, West African construction, and see how many years elapsed between the creation and until the doubling of the members, or the trebling of the members, and so on. And my simple remark is that it's been a faster pace in the New Asia than in the European case. If you know the dates, you can just put them on a piece of paper. We went from 6 to 9 to 10 to 12 to 15 and so on. Because in Europe, it took us half a century. The SEO went from 6 to 10, which is almost doubling the members in just, formally speaking, 2001 to 2015 years. So 3 times less. And so if you look at the Mercosur, if you look at the ASEAN, if you look at other organizations, the fact, for example, that Mercosur took a long, long time to go from 4 to 5 and possibly to 6 members in Latin America is revealing of the fact that the cohesion or enthusiasm or I'm looking for the right word, decisiveness to legitimize the Mercosur by expanding it was the object of much hesitation. ASEAN, similarly, was very long and slow to extend. It was created with, unless I'm wrong, 5 countries, and then 6 countries with Brunei in the early 70s. And then suddenly it accelerated. Between 1995 and 1999, it went from 6 to 10 members, ASEAN. So that's also a contextual reality, because exactly in that period, 95, 96 to the late 90s, what happened elsewhere? What happened elsewhere is the entry into force of the Maastricht Treaty and the setting up of the ASEM dialogue between the EU and ASEAN. What happened is also the 96 Shanghai Group being created, the 98 Indian and Pakistani nuclear tests, and so much happened in the second half of the 90s in the whole world. If you take the 90s altogether, of course, you have the creation of the Mercosur Latin America, the creation of the Economic and Monetary Union of West African states. So much happened by way of dynamization of regions, so that we can marvel at the pace at which membership increased certain organizations, and find it very logical that this is my concept of the echo that each region gives to what happens in other regions. So, I'm speaking too much, and I would like to now take questions from you or remarks from you as to 2 or 3 questions. Why would India in the mid-1910s change its predisposition to join the Shanghai Organization? What benefits did it expect? What attractiveness might have existed from the point of view of India in the Shanghai Organization, and today's role of India?
Thank you very much, sir, for a very enlightening lecture. My 2 observations as well as questions. So, while getting the membership in 2017, India and Pakistan both. So, even in the Indian context, it has not been taken very positively, because whenever there is a joint military exercises in SCO, then certainly there is a huge question before the Indian Pakistan can go for the joint military exercises. Number 1.
Sorry.
Joint military
Yes.
in SCO.
So your question is why? I didn't get the question.
The question is because when India and Pakistan both actually have been taken the membership in 2017, so some of the academic circle was actually has not taken it very positively, because rather than it is going to create more hassle than than this cooperation. First, so once the joint military exercise is going to take place in SCO as a platform. So can India and Pakistan go for the joint military exercise? That's the one question.
Can they? Yes.
Second is last year, 2 years back, 2023, India was having the when G20 was there. G20 presidency was there, along with the India was also having the presidency of SCO in 2023. And G20 actually has been taken a very remarkable presence in all over from media side to the government and everywhere. And SCO presidency actually has not, I mean, the meeting actually has been considered only just on the online meeting. So on this view, actually, I need your remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, the short answer is that nothing is coming in the way within NATO of Greece and Turkey taking part in the exercises. Although there are disputes, sometimes the Greeks suggest the Turkish pilots not respect their flight plan and fly too low and scare the tourists away from Greek beaches and so on and so forth. It's part of the ongoing tension. But nothing is keeping. Once countries are members of an organization, they take on board all aspects of membership. So they cannot refuse. I mean, they can more or less willingly or reluctantly take part. There are anecdotes, there are more than anecdotes, actually, in former exercises, not concerning India and Pakistan, where certain countries accepted to be part of the joint exercise, but denied passing through their territory of certain troops. So certain troops had to go hundreds of kilometers around in order to join the location of the exercise. So we are, of course, in a dynamic where partners accept or make more or less difficult or make more or less easy the reality of the commitment. You know, goodwill, bad will can exist, but it doesn't prevent the fact that the exercises or any other aspect of membership is, if not compulsory, but logically accepted. So can they take part in joint military exercises? The answer is yes. Will they? When? In which locations? For how many days? And mobilizing how many troops? These are the key factors I mentioned on Friday. Military exercises as a geopolitical exercise are part and parcel of the dynamic. The details then come into play. So whether exercises mobilizing Indian troops and Pakistani troops would take place in Pakistan or India, or in Tajikistan, or in Kazakhstan, or in China, that is the issue. And how long would they last, and how many troops will be mobilized, how many countries will be participating altogether, all members or some members only? These are the key questions. And similarly, when you mentioned the SEO summit, and you mentioned the date 2017, which is interesting because that's the date when all necessary documents were signed. So formally, that's the date of accession. Geopolitically speaking, it's 2015. But after that, the reality of membership, I told my students many times, is when the new member hosts the summit. And so unless I'm wrong, please correct me if I'm wrong, of India and Pakistan, only India has hosted the summit in a way which makes it a full summit or not a full summit because it was online. Is it not a full summit because it was online? Symbolically, yes, but fundamentally, I don't really think so. Has Pakistan hosted the STO meeting yet? Yes? Can someone check?
Foreign ministers.
No, the meeting of the heads of state. The annual meeting of the heads of state, which used to take place usually in June, which tends to take place now in September, has it been hosted by Pakistan yet or not yet? That's one criterion that is relevant, and also the fact that certain decisions are taken or not taken at that summit. In many ways, if you go back in the past, a number of important decisions were taken, I don't know if it's coincidence or not, but in SEO Summit Heads of States meeting taking place in Uzbekistan, certainly in 2010, 2016 or 15. The very important SEO Heads of States meeting of 2005, which echoed so many of the priorities self-affirmation of the SCO took place in Kazakhstan. That's a coincidence to a large extent. But so my short answer to you is the full dimension or meaning of the new members will be more clear somehow when the head of states meetings take place in the new member states, which is India, Pakistan, Iran, Belarus, and which decisions are taking then. The decisions are important in their content and scheduling or timing more than in the location where they take place. But symbolically speaking, suppose a very important decision is taken regarding the membership or regarding the internal commitments of member states. If that decision is taken in such or such country, it could be interpreted symbolically speaking as giving that country an enhanced role. But your question echoes a number of other points which I don't have time for. But the short answer once more is to suggest that I see no possibility for a member to refuse blatantly some aspect of membership, be it military exercises, be it budgetary participation, be it facilitation of cross-border exchanges, and so on and so forth. Which is why the key question has always been and is the extent to which the multilateral dimension of an organization is or not conducive to not solving, but tabling or facilitating bilateral issues. And that question is posed and exists for all organizations, with more or less acuity, more or less sensitivity, depending on the history, depending on a number of factors. But as I've said yesterday, in theoretical, in conceptual terms, a regional construction does not solve bilateral issues, and to some extent increases tensions because members are made to meet often and negotiate and collaborate all the time. They can't ignore each other anymore. So the more they meet, the more tensions come about. Secondly, the very existence of a multilateral factor, multilateral forum, sooner or later potentially can make bilateral tensions a nuisance or hindrance. And there is a degree, I'm hesitating with the word pressure, what's the better word? There is a degree of encouragement from the persuasion from the multilateral forum put onto the leaders of the countries that may linger on to the bilateral tensions. Not meaning that the bilateral tensions are unjustified, but meaning that their consequence for the functioning of the multilateral forum begin to be perceived as avoidable or insufficiently justified, and so on and so forth. Within the European Union, as I said, as a joking matter to some extent, but it's not a joking matter, we have fishing issues between France and Spain. If I were to tell you, do France and Spain come across to you as two countries particularly in tension, particularly opposed to each other, you probably would say no to me. We've had tensions with England over history, so on. We've had tensions, or even not historical, but contemporary, present economic or trading issues with Germany, and so on and so forth. But France and Spain sometimes call in the navy to make sure the fishing vessels do not arrest each other. So, so again, I use European examples not because I think they're better, because I know them less imperfectly. But in the case of the Shanghai dynamic, more generally speaking, if you look at the 10 member states, there are a number of bilateral issues, some of them very serious. I'm aware that you are more sensitive to the issues regarding the northeast of India and Pakistan and the Himalayas and the Kashmir and so on, aware of that. But if you look at the other members, of which you might be less aware, they have very serious contentions. The cross-border water issues have brought certain Central Asian countries to the brink of military skirmishes. Now, military skirmishes among member states of an organization is not a honeymooning. It's a bit of a negative factor. There are actual apprehensions. Let me phrase this in very careful terms. Apprehensions among certain member states as to whether the bordering populations would be protected or respected. And scenarios of instability at the border still exist. But the positive aspect is that the existence of the SCO has made it possible to address directly and officially issues such as terrorism, separatism, extremism, the three evils, plus drug trafficking, plus human trafficking. And not only have they been addressed, but those countries have come up with common legal definitions of such issues. And the fact that they now have a legal definition makes it possible to devise and implement a common mechanism for fighting against it. Lawyers tell us that so long as they don't have a common definition, they cannot produce a common legal regime, which for non-legal scholars is a bit of a shocking thing, because you'd expect action to be possible even before there is a common legal agreement on the definition. But in the case of those countries, they have come up with that. To the point where a number of multilateral agreements on definitions or possible courses of actions have been translated into national legislation, which is not a direct mechanism. As in Europe, we have directives or regulations automatically or almost automatically translated into national legislation. In this region, it's a different mechanism, but the result is the same. There is a multilateral decision and impact on the national legislation. Now, I'm not aware of how much India, Pakistan, India and Belarus, as new members, have also implemented within the national legislation the priorities or decisions taken at the multilateral level. I don't know if you do, but it would probably come as another thing. So these are the issues more general than your question, but your question triggers them, so I thank you very much. So next, who knows to what extent the military exercises since 2017 have included or implied Indian troops, or Pakistani troops, or Iranian troops? Does anyone know? Or because we'll share on Friday some tables with the past exercises, but they are never. Sorry?
Not probably.
Yes, but these tables are never complete, nor up to date. But the fact that they have not taken part in them together is not new, in the sense that other member states. I mean, not all exercises have mobilized all member states. Often they are mobilizing only two members, or three or four, but it's never been, unless I'm wrong again, the case that they mobilized all six members when it was only 6 members. When they did, they were exercises on a limited scale.
More question Sir, within the same framework of SCO, is it possible that slightly will TAPI can be materialized with the same vendor? TAPI, Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, yes,
Well, the short answer is no, not directly, in the sense that that Turkmenistan is fully part of the TAPI scheme, but very minimally affiliated to the SCO. It's a guest attendance, which was granted Turkmenistan, unless I'm wrong. Can someone check, please, on the internet? In 2012, I think it was. So in French, we say from the distant live contact. So minimally, so Turkmenistan would not accept or be the object of any sort of SCO incentive or pressure or persuasion to reactivate the TAPI on account of the SCO. But the possibility of another scheme being launched formally within the SCO membership is becoming more real because of the four countries, TAPI, Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India. They're all affiliates. Afghanistan with a specific status. I should say a few words about Afghanistan and SCO just now. But compared to the moment when TAPI was first suggested, the fact that two of the four countries are members, that one is an observer, next in line in my analysis, geopolitical analysis, Afghanistan for membership. Turkmenistan, sooner or later, will be enhanced as an affiliate, depending maybe on the views of the president of the country, or depending on the persuasion that so things might change. At present, I think the reasons why the scheme is on hold is due to Turkmen hesitations and due to Afghan uncertainties. Although, however difficult it is, we should be able to differentiate between cold-minded or cold-blooded geopolitical analysis and other forms of considerations. The interest of Afghanistan today is definitely to let the territory be crossed by imports and transits of goods, whether energy or other forms of goods. Now, in terms of the SCO, let us remind ourselves of 2 or 3 dates. Afghanistan, first of all, was the recipient of a status as a member of the so-called Afghanistan SCO contact group, created, unless I'm wrong again, in 2005, which means early on, which means almost concomitantly with the observer status granted to Mongolia, Iran, Pakistan, and Iran. So something happened by way of context. The associate status of those 4 countries is a contextual analysis, is a context within which Afghanistan became the recipient of that not status, but mechanism. What is a contact group? Perhaps not much, it's just a name, or perhaps, on the contrary, some official forum whereby specific issues can be addressed and discussed. So this is my concept of the specificity, or the Afghan specificity for the SCO. It is to date the only country that is the object of a SCO, whatever, contact group. That's 2005. And certainly in 2012, Afghanistan received the observer status, out of the blue, not having been before a dialogue partner and upgraded to observer, when they upgraded to member. That again is a specific situation. No other country went from no status to observer status, unless I'm wrong. Belarus went from dialogue partners to observer to member. Some countries went directly, well, of course, Mongolia, India, Pakistan, and Iran went from no status to observer at the time when the dialogue partner status was not yet activated. It was activated only in 2009. But since then, every country goes, so to speak, through phases, not Afghanistan. And Afghanistan is definitely and logically, and for many, many years, in line for membership at some point in due course. In due course. Whether the events since 2021 have delayed this, I noticed this morning, I checked my sources this morning, and Afghanistan is now
inactive since 2021.
Inactive. Now officially on the, that's the Wikipedia page, yes. Not the SEO website, it's inactive. Inactive observer is again a first. No other observer was ever called inactive or active or something else. It wasn't specified. It's inactive. Why could it be
My
inactive?
question was actually because in September 2024, some of the work of TAPI actually has been started by Taliban government in Afghanistan. So that was the news from diplomat. And then on that basis, actually, I was, my curiosity was whether on this platform is it possible because of India-Pakistan hostile nature of the relations. It could not materialize for the last 20, almost last 20 or 25 years. So whether the SCO can also be a kind of platform where actually it can facilitate this.
Yes.
So that was the, this was the news before that.
I think we agree, and I agree with you. And I go back to my first answer. Directly, the direct SCO impact on the TAPI scheme is not the hypothesis that we're looking at. The indirect fact that the existence of a multilateral forum where other forms of decisions, programs, decisions are taken could indirectly spill over and include TAPI as an encouragement is a high hypothesis. The other reason why the reactivation of TAPI makes sense is because the other oil export link was interrupted. That between Turkmenistan across the Caspian Sea to Azerbaijan, and from Azerbaijan connecting with the TBC pipelines, Baku, Tbilisi, Ceyhan, Azerbaijan, Georgia, Turkey. So if the western directions from Turkmenistan is interrupted, then the eastern direction is logically for it to be reactivated. But if we meet again in a few months' time, in a few years' time, and by then the India-Pakistani imperfect solution to energy land imports into India is solved or has progressed through the TAPI scheme, then that would be logical news and news that, in my analysis, are due any time. It might take 6 months, it might take 30 years, but it will eventually happen.
Considering Iran and Pakistan historical background, all right.
Sorry, Iran and Pakistan.
Yeah. Considering Iran and Pakistan's historical background of promoting and supporting terrorist activities, and currently observe a country like Afghanistan, where a militant organization has rose to power, how SCO is reconciling its foundational values of anti-terrorism and regional security in this area, and also working on realigning the multipolar world and new Asia concept in this region.
Okay, we need to formulate the question. You should ask again because I can't hear you very well, and your question is complex. And yes.
Considering the Iran and the Pakistan terrorism and the military are acting the occupant of Afghanistan, how is SCO handling the terrorism and
So I was asking, given the background of Iran and Pakistan's historical background of supporting and promoting terrorist activities, and observe a country which will be getting a membership in SCO, that is Afghanistan, where a militant organization has rose to power in the recent times, how SCO is reconciling and realigning its foundational value of, and promotion of anti-terrorism in this region, at the same time reconciling its value of regional security in this area.
So the good news is that your question exceeds my competence, so I should decline it. The bad news is that I'm going to try and attempt to answer it. From the point of view of the SCO official functioning and official mechanisms, the issue of terrorism is tackled. They have an institution, RATS, the Regional Anti-Terrorist Structure that exists, that has come up with and is coming up with lists of organizations considered jointly considered as terrorists, against which immediately legal, military, and police actions is taking place. So it is being taken care of. With what degree of efficiency, with what degree. There are official figures that exist. The RATS actually indicates on the website that they have, what's the word in English? They have outwitted no, they have made impossible a number of attacks. And there is another figure for 2024, 69 attacks, that sort of thing. So they're able to identify organizations and to launch actions and to, what's the word, dismantle organizations, and so on. So that's one aspect.
I think the question is on state-sponsored terrorism.
Yeah. And how SCO
State-sponsored terrorism in the terminology of the SCO doesn't exist. It's a contradiction in terms.
But in reality, it does exist. We are aware of some states.
Yes, but the question is, from the point of view of the SEO, there is never any full agreement as to what is a terrorist group or action. So the state terrorism is a hypothesis, which was raised in for some countries of Northern Africa, even Latin America in the past. I mean, we all know examples, but we don't want to mention them now. Officially, so the second aspect of the question was not on terrorism, but the other aspect was?
multi-polarism, how the power sharing has been taken
No,
care
sorry,
of
the militant regime of Afghanistan is.
Afghanistan.
Or,
Afghanistan,
yeah, this is what you said.
Yeah.
Taliban.
Yes. So I come back to the point I made already since Monday, that the nature of the regime is not relevant to the dynamic of the organization. And I made the comparison with ASEAN. If you look at the ASEAN memberships and addition of new members, the issue of the type of the regime was not taken into consideration. And in some cases, the regime originated in the military takeover of power. You know the country I mean. So the nature of the regime is not considered relevant for the cohesion, progress, or functioning of the organization. Unlike the European case, we are very criterianized construction. We have the political criteria of the Copenhagen Summit of 1998, and the economic and monetary criteria of the Maastricht Treaty of 91. So any member must respect those criteria, or any new applicant must respect those criteria, which is why the pre-admission process sometimes takes years or even decades. There is not in the case of the SCO, nor in the case of the ASEAN. Very disappointing answer. But still, I tried.
Thank you so much.
Sir.
Good afternoon, sir. Sir, am I audible?
Yes.
Sir, so my question is, sir, we were speaking about the membership of Istanbul vis-a-vis SCO. So recently, in the recent BRICS summit, we saw India rejecting the membership of Istanbul to BRICS. So now, while talking about membership in SCO, can we expect a compromise among the major powers with respect to Istanbul being a part of either of the organizations?
Sorry, who rejected Turkey?
In the recent BRICS summit.
And why?
Sir, India did not give official reasons for it.
Ah.
So we can interpret what are the reasons.
And what is your hypothesis? Is it because there is a trading competition with Turkey, or India deems the Turkish territory not open enough to corridor transports? Or
Sir, Turkey was not very flexible with India's removal of Article 370. There were more statements with respect. They were interfering in our domestic politics.
Yeah, again, an issue to do with domestic politics and how one country or the other tackles the domestic issue. So this is relevant in the short term. This is part of diplomatic dynamics. When diplomats meet, they disagree, or they want to disagree, or they find a reason to disagree if they want to disagree. But in the long term, such issues are not are not fully relevant to the construction of the continent, or to the construction of a post-Cold War, post-war, post-independence, complete reshuffling of things. So this recent Indian-Turkish illustration that you suggest is not as relevant as you are suggesting it is for the long-term evolution. That's my first answer. I'll come back to the main answer. The other thing is that if we compare the SCO and the BRICS and other forms of dynamics, are we comparing exactly comparable things? The organization of the SCO is a full organization in the formal sense of the term. The BRICS is more than a functional program, but it's less than an organization. It's a form of open forum, open dialogue, perhaps more consistent or more able to devise common positions than APEC. APEC is an Asia-Pacific Economic Conference, which has suggested to enhance to a customs regime or a free customs areas in the Pacific and so on. But a long time ago, in 1994, at the Bogor summit in Indonesia, the APEC said we should produce someday a customs union. That never materialized. So, what is the BRICS? The BRICS is a diplomatic forum. Does the BRICS take decisions? No, it suggests positions. So I think, in strict terms, we cannot compare the SCO and the BRICS. In geopolitical terms, yes, we can, because the SCO is a continental land construction, making it possible for the east of Asia, not just China, but the east of Asia, to connect to the west of Asia on land. The BRICS, I would compare the BRICS and the New Silk Road more easily. It is a facilitating forum for the countries of the once called South, and now called Global South, or whatever you call it, to adopt common positions. That's my second answer. My third answer concerning Turkey is not what you're suggesting, that there is certainly a Turkish-Indian tension that would be the main characteristic of the Shanghai dynamic. I think it's part of the unavoidable sporadic disagreements and tensions that have existed, that do exist, and that will continue to exist. No, it's never the case that all members or affiliates agree 100% on everything all the time. It's not the case because some issues are contentious, and governments change, majorities change, programs change, parties change, so forth. My last answer to you is what I've said already before. Turkey has a specific status as a member of NATO and as a dialogue partner of the SCO, and that duality is not sustainable. Either Turkey will never progress towards associate status or full membership of the SCO and remain where it is, or it will somehow dissociate from NATO. Perhaps not leaving it immediately, but perhaps going from member to associate or to a partner for peace or something of the sort. That's the interesting question. If you're suggesting that that Turkey also must make a choice between NATO and the BRICS and the SCO and so on, there we go into the discussion that I would like us to have. I'm not downgrading your concern. I know more than I'm saying. I know more than I'm saying about the reasons why Turkey and India recently went into disagreement. I know, in fact, not everything, but more. But I don't want to use it now, so to speak. But answering you, I'm trying to think of another situation. Can you help me find another situation where a member state and another affiliate are in tension? Let's just try to find, if we could before the other session, that would be good. Yes.
Good afternoon, sir. Thank you for very thought-provoking lecture, sir. So my question is related to great game again, Pakistan. Sir, as we know, this is the fourth phase of the great game. Earlier it was between Britain and Tsarist Russia, then USSR and USA, then multilateral regional party, and in 2000, after 2021, the situation has been changed. Taliban too came into the power, and we know that not even a single country recognized Afghanistan, but SCO member, mostly Russia, China, India, is participating and engaging with Afghanistan very actively in comparison to NATO and Western part. But we know that there is no improvement in inclusive government, there is no improvement in human rights violations like human rights. Even then, this country is engaging Afghanistan very actively. So how did Afghanistan situation influence the new grade game politics? In which direction this is going on, and how this will influence the Indian interest? Because in SCO, we know India don't have good relation with China and Pakistan. So there are so many contradictions, and which direction this is going on? Because human rights violation, inclusive government like inclusive and persist in Afghanistan, but even SCO members are actively participating. It was not possible in the case of Taliban first, but in case of Taliban second, situation is totally reversed. So in which direction it is going on?
If I understand your long and the complex question well enough, I will start on my answer with, again, dissociating domestic issues from international or geopolitical issues. However cruel, however artificial this may sound to you, and I'm sorry if I sound cruel or artificial, the reason for that is that the history of constructions of regions and alliances and empires and dismantling of empires and those issues usually do not take into consideration issues of domestic regimes or sociology or whatever else. We could go through the history of the world and to suggest that when major reshuffling of alliances and major reshuffling of partnerships are established, what is taken into consideration from a realist point of view is states' interests. My second answer is that in many, many ways, and this is why your question is so good, in many, many ways, the territory of Afghanistan, not the regime, or the history, or the politics, whatever, the territory of Afghanistan is the key, is one of the lock, or the key to the construction of the region, and has been for 200 years. It has been the territory, not invented, but curtailed, to find a solution to the British and Russian imperial expansions in the 19th century. It took 20 years for the two countries to decide no longer to fight each other as empires, but to establish a buffer zone, Afghanistan and the Ulhan Corridor. I think it's 1893, 1894 agreement between Britain and Russia at the time. And since then, or even before then, Afghanistan has been, however derogatory the expression may sound, a buffer zone. It became then a zone of competing attempts at domination. The Soviets moved into Afghanistan in 1979, and indirectly after some events, the moving into Afghanistan in 2001 of NATO, the USA and others, in the context of the fight against terrorism. But the fact that the troops, the NATO troops under the UN umbrella, remained 20 years, which is a long time. 20 years is not an intervention. 20 years is a presence which lasts. And so I remember I wrote a speech for my colleagues in Kazakhstan at some point, and I said there are two questions. Why did NATO move into Afghanistan in 2001, and why is it staying there so long? And by the time I finished the piece, actually NATO was withdrawing. In international diplomatic terms, in geopolitical terms, in geoeconomic terms, Afghanistan is a key. And I will say in my conclusion of the course next week that we ought to analyze the situation around Afghanistan in a time perspective, which I will say next week, is the amount of time during which, 1 or 2 centuries, I mean a fairly long time, the amount of time during which the West or the Europeans or whatever you call them were dominant or present or influential or controlling Afghanistan is now superseded. And this change is opening up a period during which as much time as before, the Western influence is going to be replaced by a re-Asianization of Afghanistan for 1 or 2 centuries. which is why the hesitation to let go of Afghanistan was so strong. To remain there for 20 years is a duration that is not justified by the purpose of the intervention in 2001, to the extent that some president of a Western country, member of NATO, said our purpose for being in Afghanistan was not to stabilize the country. The exact opposite words to what was used in 2001. So the hesitation or the incoherence of the justification for the presence is, I think, a key to understand what I'm saying. That there was a long presence of the West in Afghanistan for reasons to do with history, a long 2 centuries or less, a long hesitation to leave 20 years, 2001, 2021, and now the dynamic is open to a full Asianization, re-Asianization of Afghanistan. The last answer to you is that, as I said already, the territory holds the key for logistical transport. And when we switch our concern from political issues to logistical issues, we view the territory of Afghanistan completely different. It's vast, it's densely populated, it's rich in mineral resources. It's located at the crossroad of potential railways that will connect east and west, north and south, which are not yet connected. It's one of the solutions to actually mapping out the connections within Eurasia. And so these dominant logistical issues will eventually lead to realization, to agreements and to the buildings of railways and so on. So again, as in the case of this young lady over there, and in your case, my answer is disappointing because I'm not elaborating on the political issues. But I'm sure this will come up again next week.
Next question. No questions?
Well, then you have...
Another comment?
Nothing. Maybe just something to what Pramod said in the beginning regarding Tapi pipeline. I think the impediment to India, to this energy pipeline is not just India and Pakistan, but in the recent past, it's also Afghanistan and Pakistan as well. So it's not just the India-Pakistan issue that troubles. And now I think with this recent sort of standoff and probably a war breaking out, I don't think this Tapi pipeline is going to come to fruition in the next whatever recent future. Just a comment.
Some more comments?
Sir, according to you, how near is Iran in becoming a superpower, nuclear power?
Nuclear power or superpower?
Nuclear power,
Okay.
actually. And what effect will it have on the world and especially SCU? And the other part would be that yesterday you said about the triangle of Russia, China and India. So if Iran becomes a nuclear power, will it overshadow India or will it replace India? Because India, as you said, is not a, you can say, active member or not a keen part of SCO. But Iran, on the other hand, wants to become a, much
Yes.
more.
Well, my observation is that this audience is not very active in terms of explaining to me India's positions, India's priorities, or India's views on the SEO, which brings to my mind some side comments. I systematically ask my students when they come from China or India or those countries, how much they were made aware through their schooling or the news on the television of the Shanghai Cooperation construction. And for a long, long time, until only about 4 or 5 years ago, the Chinese students, which I teach in their first year, so they are fresh out of high school, told me that recently on the Chinese news, there is talk of the SCO. In the case of India, much more quickly, actually, was the SCO on the news, and young students were aware of what was happening not with much enthusiasm or anywhere else. But my question to you, which you haven't answered yet, is how do you interpret the apparent observance or attitude of India, not just being now a member, observing how things are happening, but not actively committing. And I think that this may be the views that one has from the point of view of the news on television or newspapers and so on and so forth. But in reality, I cannot imagine India's decision to actually become a member to be followed by, I'm looking for the right word, not a passive, but a distantly active participation in the organization. Clearly, SCO membership, not exclusively, but in addition to the role of India in the BRICS and other organizations, is an asset to Indian diplomacy. Having said that about Iran, I don't think the discussion of who becomes the super of something, or who dominates someone else, or who replaces something else, is relevant in the present time. That sort of approach was relevant until not too long ago, but certainly in the 20th century and before. I stick to the point, however artificial it may sound, that the philosophy, the official philosophy in the Charter or in the treaty is equality of members. And that, I think, in Asia is a newer concept than in Europe. I remember once in Mongolia, a student told me, we can never have equality of countries and partners in Asia because look at the population of China, the population of Mongolia. It's China is of course more powerful, more something. Because so I said, let's stop. Let's take a piece of chalk and write figures on the board, and we found out that the ratio of the Chinese Mongolian population is the same as the ratio of the Luxembourg, and which is the most populated country of Europe, Poland, Germany, and so on. So the demographic imbalance is not the reason why European states are not, by their treaty, equal in rights. And so Mongolia is not a member, but still. So the concept of equality is there, and of course it's unreal in terms of macroeconomic power, military armaments, and so on. But it's a concept which works its way towards becoming part of the shared values. However, some people argue that the decision-making mode within the SCO, which is consensus, is one that may lead to decisions echoing not properly the unanimous view, but the views of some more than the views of others. So we are into the potential transformation of things. And so whether Iran becomes a hyperpower or a superpower, and my academic question to you should be, how do you define superpower?
Not superpower, nuclear power.
He corrected himself. Nuclear power.
Nuclear power. So, and who dominates whom and who replaces whom and so on, is a discussion less potentially or contemporarily, I think, relevant. I will explain what I mean by that. But if you talk about Iran as a nuclear power, so is India. So where's the?
No, I was saying that if Iran becomes a nuclear power, since India is not that interested in SCO, as you saw, so will Iran overshadow India in the, what we can say, the SCO meetings or SCO decision meetings?
No, the short answer is no. The short answer is I don't see the relevance of the nuclear issue. It so happens that many of the SCO members are nuclear powers, or what's this expression?
On the threshold of
on the threshold of the nuclear power. So, if anything, this is reinforcing the SCO as such. In fact, the SCO is characterized now and has been taken by nuclear powers outside Central Asia and Central Asia. Nuclear powers, you have Russia, China, India, Pakistan, and would be Iran. That's half of them, and the other 5 are. But it's not. Any power asset of a member state reinforces the whole organization. In realpolitik or realist sort of terms. No, my last answer to you would be a follow-up on the concept of the equalization of members and of countries, and the fact that the concept of superpowers or great powers dominating others is gradually being replaced by alternatives. The superpower vision is a triangle, whereas 2 countries, and now 3 countries with India, would dominate the others, dictate their terms, force decisions onto them, and so on and so forth. This is something which may well happen. Diplomacy, as we all know, is not the art of compromise. Diplomacy is the art of winning over the others, basically. But the other concept which I came up with in my mind a long time ago is the relevance today of middle powers in the continent of Eurasia. And looking at, even just at a map, if you look at countries irrespective of present politics and so on, such as Mongolia, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Iran, Turkey, you have an arch of countries situated, cartographically speaking, between Russia and China and India, which are large enough in size, credible enough in the macroeconomics, rich enough in energy resources and other assets of power to make sense. And so these can no longer, in the sense of the 20th century, 19th century, be dominated by others. This is an intuition I have. It's not a demonstrated proof. If we mention Iran, what I would conclude with is simply the fact that if you look again at the map, or if you look at the SCO dynamics going west, 3 territories make absolute sense as being indispensable to the solidification or the affirmation of the Shanghai dynamic, and this is the territories of Turkmenistan, Iran, and Turkey, linking the continent, the heart of the continent, to the open seas of the Gulf and the Mediterranean. And the greatest achievement so far of the SCO is its maritimization. It's a huge classic land power in geopolitical terms, a huge classic land and terrestrial space, now connected and linked to all the relevant seas. Which seas are the shores of SCO affiliates? The Pacific Ocean, the Sea of Okhotsk, the Sea of Japan, wrongly named for the Koreans, the Sea of China, the Indian Ocean, the Sea of Oman, the Gulf, the Mediterranean, the Baltic Sea, the Black Sea, and the Caspian Sea. All of them, except for, well, the Atlantic is a bit further on, but the Atlantic is just beyond the Marmara Sea and the This is what we call in French a tour de force. I think you have the expression in English as well. And this is going totally unnoticed in the West. I mentioned to you in 2012, when Turkey became a dialogue partner, no one in the West, no one in the press noticed it. Whereas this was a diplomatic event, comparable in magnitude to Turkey becoming a NATO member in 1954, 55, possibly becoming a member of the EU, but that's gone now, and no one noticed it. The SCO summits were never really in the French press, French television, French newspapers, until 2022. For some reason, 2022, the French press and media woke up to the existence of the SCO. And so a journalist called me saying, would you participate in an interview on the SCO Daniel Summit? And I said, no. He said, why? Because I said in 2012, your colleagues completely ignored, although I pressed them not to, completely ignored Turkish accession to the status of affiliate to the organization. And you are asking me in 2022, 20 years later than the St. Petersburg Charter, 20 years later, and all the succeeding, in fact, Iranian membership was hardly in the French press or in the European press. why am I saying this to you? I'm saying this to you because I'm trying to push you to tell me how much in the public opinion or in the news or in the in the government speeches or what do governments and leaders do? They advertise what they do. On regular intervals, they make speeches to say we've done so much, we're going to do so much. This is how we are developing the country's interests. So, in the case of India, how much is that present in the press? I mean, how much do your leaders over the last 10 years have presented the Shanghai Cooperation? Not much, perhaps, but the BRICS, yes. I mean, the media coverage is only.
Except the summit, which was big, because that's where our Prime Minister did some plain talking with the Russian President.
Right. And symbolically speaking, Samarkand is when in 2017 took place the first so-called Central Asian Forum. Very interesting moment. I happened to be there as well, but I don't know why, but I was there. It was a very fascinating moment when what is to me the most relevant present dynamic, the possibility, I repeat myself, of Central Asia forming the missing link by creating a forum or a union or a corporation, which could be the Central Asian Water Management body, which I mentioned. The Central Asia countries forming together something multilateral will be the missing link to the larger scale continental reinvention of what I called the New Asia. So Samarkand used to be for thousands of years a meeting point and has become a symbol of renovations. So I wish to apologize to this young lady over there in pink and to this young man over there because my answers to you were disappointing. I'm aware of that. But don't let disappointment take over our communication, and we can pick up on some of the points.
Any other question? Comment? Yes, please. Yes, Amanda. Maybe you could come forward and then you could be a little loud.
Yes, you are, madam.
Sir, one of your answers, you suggested that the nature of regime in individual nations do not really impact the functioning and progression of multilateral organizations like the SCO. But don't you think that the nature of the regime in these nations are a representation and reflection of normative principles of values and the policy priorities that we stand for? So, the difference in the regimes, that is the democratic, semi-authoritarian, or authoritarian, leads to differences in the values and the policy priorities of the individual nations, which could be a possible lacking in the possession of the objectives of the multilateral arrangement. Multilateral organization is a certain consensus of the values and values that we want to work towards.
Let me take the first one first. I cannot contradict myself in the sense that, not because I'm aware that I need to be coherent, but because it's what I believe. I believe that the nature of the regimes is not geopolitically relevant to the decisions affecting the power structure or the positioning of the country with its neighbors. I believe that, and on a different magnitude, you could argue, if you were a European, that we managed to bring together republics and monarchies. Even though the difference in the 20th century between the two regimes is not one that is of great significance. But not too long before, we fought long wars. Monarchies opposing the emergence of republics. That's a part of our history. In your region, there's a different type of differences among regimes, but the nature of the regime did not affect the diplomatic or geopolitical interests of the countries. I stick to that. but this is the concept. But the concrete discussion we could have, if we had more time, or we can keep it over the coming months or years, the concrete aspect is the willingness, the hastiness, or the hesitation of member states to adopt or respect or follow the agreements established among members. Whatever is decided, not decided, but mentioned in the SCO summits as the desirable or likely evolutions within the organization can be sooner or later, slower or more rapidly implemented by countries. So, a country like India or any other country has a margin of maneuver as to the way it implements domestically recommendations or positions not adopted, but not legally constraining, but discussed and becoming a consensus at the level of the meetings of the SCO.
The next question, what is it?
The next question is related to yesterday's seminar that you mentioned that the state precedes the nation. So it would be really good if you could shed a little more light in that direction, because I thought that nation, which is based on, for example, shared lived experiences, shared history, cultural heritage, precedes the formation of political states per se. So it would be good if you could explain a little more on how the state precedes the nation.
How the state precedes the nation. I said yesterday, if I remember correctly, that when we discussed the two words, the two concepts, state and nation, state is defined as the existence of a fairly centralized, stable political system with its legal dimensions, capable of managing the nation, keeping it together, and being a sort of authority over the population in the country. So in that sense, the state existed before the nation, I said, I think yesterday, in the case of Central Asia, because what the nation is today is significantly different to what it was before. If you take the case of Kazakhstan, for example, before the Soviet federal presence, and before the Russian imperial arrival, what the Kazakh nation was a community of nomadic tribes, Muslim, identified by a language, a Turkic language, and of course there were there was a presence of other ethnic groups. I'm not comfortable with the word ethnic, but it's accepted in many contexts. So you had in the land of Kazakhstan, Uzbeks and neighbors that were present. But that situation was altered by the what I called yesterday the displacement of populations and the coming in of very numerous other ethnic groups in the 20th century. So by the time 1991 came about, the situation was that there was a legacy of a Kazakh Khanate, or whatever is a politically defined system, plus a inherited practice of institutions from the Soviet regimes. So basically the modern institutions of the state, the courts, the ministries, that sort of thing was in place, but the nation had to be reinvented in many ways. So in that sense, the nation came after the state. I'm not saying my expression is fully satisfactory or a complete form of academic presentation, but this is my analysis of my perception of a country which I have been visiting and teaching in for your kindergarten days or primary school days. in the sense that certainly in 1991, what was the situation from a social or sociological point of view? It was a situation where what we call the nation was certainly former Soviet citizens, no longer having a Soviet passport, no longer not really knowing what to do with the mention on the Soviet passport of their nationality. As you know, the passport mentioned two things. It mentioned the citizenship, which was Soviet, and the nationality, which was the Estonian nationality. So suddenly they had to decide what to do with it. And so they immediately invented the word Kazakhstani, or Uzbekistani, or Kyrgyzstani to suggest that there was a new word echoing a new reality, which was an idea conducive to fairly mutual acceptance of each other. There were not immediate ethnic violence taking place in the country, and when they were presented as ethnic tensions when they were in fact economic and socio-economic tensions between the poor, the rich, the employed, the unemployed, and so on. And then a few years later, after the country was reorganized in economic, industrial, bureaucratic, educational terms, there was a debate as to renaming the nation. And I think, I don't know about this country, but I know about my country. If we started discussing the name of the country, changing it to something, this would be a fairly real upheaval of identity. So to suggest to call Kazakhstan Kazakhili to us, to you Indians, or to me French, is not a very disturbing sort of topic, but to them it was. And renaming a country, to my knowledge, was taking place recently in Turkey, is not yet taking place in Kazakhstan, but is being discussed. Was discussed also in Mongolia to some extent, and I'm sure this is a moment when the nation is being partly reinvented. So that's what I meant by the state precedes the nation, however imperfect this expression is. But the most touching testimony you could offer me would be to reflect for yourself as to what these questions and debates mean for you, for your own country.
Any other questions? One last question. Yeah, please.
Independently of the fact, that for many, many years, the identity was suggested to be post-Soviet. Why? Because post-Soviet was a historical reality and a very comfortable, common situation. Whether you were Kyrgyz, Uzbek, Polish, whatever else, you were post-Soviet. End of story. And certainly people asking themselves, what am I? And we know that the question, who am I or what are you, is often in history a very destabilizing one. Yes, sorry.
Good afternoon, sir. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Yeah. So, like in the past few opinions and whatever you stated about yesterday's, like the disappearance, decades of disappearance, there was one single question which I found contradictory in the whole statement from like vis-a-vis the first and the second points of yesterday's lecture, which was that the whole absence or the disappearance was not actually the actual disappearance. It was just basically an absence from the decision-making process, and how the nations and the states were artificially removal, like the appearance and the disappearance of the borders were very artificial throughout the whole stance. And in the second point itself, it's like you stated in your points that in Central Asia, nations have existed before the states. So, and basically they were pre-existent. And but in one of the examples, there was this thing that in Tajikistan, a lot of Koreans were displaced. So,
in where, sorry?
Tajikistan.
Tajikistan.
Yeah, a lot of Koreans were displaced in the whole process. So, can we say like where is the whole point of nations being pre-existed? Because then the state structuring was easier because they pre-existed. But in and all, the nationality were very different. So if we say that the states or the nations were artificially removed from, like the borders were artificially removed and disappeared on the convenience, how can we say the state, the whole construction was much easier than?
Yeah, thank you for a very pointed and challenging question. I said, yes, yesterday I said disappearance doesn't mean non-existence. So we agree on that. There is a continuation of existence, not just physical, but also cultural existence, even though politically, in terms of sovereignty and decisions, a nation has disappeared. So that's what I meant. Under the Soviet regime in Central Asia, or under the Japanese occupation in Korea, or under all the other examples I mentioned, the nation as sovereign nation disappears, but individuals and their cultures and values exist. And I also said, secondly, yesterday, that the existence remains, but undercover, underground, sometimes illegal. It was to some extent illegal to practice the religion or the language or the traditions of the families and communities. Now, as to the displaced populations, Koreans were displaced in great numbers, mostly, in fact, to Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, not just to Tajikistan, but it is estimated that 500,000 were present in the region 30 years ago, and of course, so they were, but they were, as Koreans, totally suppressed. I mean, the Koreanness was not relevant. So when I see your point. What you are saying is that after independence in Uzbekistan, the ethnic Uzbeks represented the nation, and that in Tajikistan, the ethnic Tajiks were the nation, not the displaced Koreans and so on. So I see your point. But from the back to the question about the state and the nation. After independence, basically, there was a new nation called the Tajikistani or the Kazakhstani. And in their perception, that was enough to cohere them as a nation because they were no longer Soviet. The main issue was to be or not to be Soviet. Or not, which is the same question, even more acute, that animated the post-independence nations in the Baltic states. The Lithuanians and the Estonians and so on were extremely aware that what they wanted to be is no longer Soviets, or under Russian linguistic or Russian historical influence. So there was enough to cohere them. In fact, I came across in many informal, human contact way, in Kazakhstan in particular, which I know more, with people who were perfectly comfortable with being Kazakhstani, citizens of a new country, post-Soviet, having overcome what the Soviet legacy might have meant, and happily linguistically Korean at home, happily linguistically Polish or German in the school at home, whatever else, and integrating the dual or treble or quadruple dimension without any problem. The main question for them was to be a citizen with the word Kazakhstani of an independent country, sovereign country, if possible prosperous and stable, with the liberty of practicing whatever language they wanted and whatever religion they wanted or whatever traditions they wanted. And in fact, one issue which we haven't mentioned yet, because it's not really, all these questions are absolutely fascinating, but they are beginning to be one remote away from a course on the geopolitics of the new great game. But it's interesting that they are taking over because this is a proof that high-level, high-flying diplomacy is never the end of the story. But back to your question to conclude, one issue we haven't mentioned is the issue of multilingualism. And I see two different historical realities when it comes to post-something, post-colonial, post-independence, post-something, is how governments or states or whatever dealt with the linguistic issue. And there are two attitudes that have been adopted if you look at the whole world in such a context. Either an attempt to do away with the language of the former colonizer or dominator or external force, and to revert to a nationalistic linguistic sort of policy, which usually leads to impoverishment of the students' capacity. That's my experience. It doesn't matter which country, but I came across on a number of occasions in my university students who came from countries formerly part of the French colonies, who did not speak French well at all because the government suddenly decided that students should be studying in their own language, which was not French. If I say which one, you guess which country it is, so I will say it. But they did not speak properly the official language of the country because it was a language which is characterized by having national differences. You have the local version of the language and you have the original version of the language. You have two types of languages. So they found themselves, and they didn't speak English well at all, so they found themselves linguistically impaired as to their capacity to actually study abroad. The other attitude of the governments is to not keep the language of origin, which is there in the country for good or bad reasons, but it's there. It's common to the neighbors usually, or common to a number of countries in the world, so it's an asset. Re-establish, redevelop the language of the country, Kazakh, for example, in Kazakhstan. Make sure that all student or pupil or student in Kazakhstan studies Kazakh in the school, primary school, high school, and university, even if they study in Russian or English, but they have some knowledge of Kazakh, and make a third language or a fourth language highly recommended or highly commendable. And in Kazakhstan, the government adopted officially a trilingual policy early on in the 90s, saying that anyone in Kazakhstan with a high university degree should speak three languages, English, Kazakh, and Russian. Plus, and so multilingualism, why am I stressing the point? Multilingualism is a very simple, complex to implement, but a simple decision that is capable of taking away much of the nationalistic, inter-ethnic misunderstandings and tensions. When people speak languages, they don't antagonize as much as when they don't. And it's a mistake we've done in Europe, for example, not offering schools languages corresponding to the countries where, for reasons that have been condemned by history, we were present.
No other questions for today? Okay.
Back to geopolitics.
One last question, right?
Yes, you are.
In terms of building democratic institutions in their respective countries.
What lessons can they learn from you?
From India.
Let me remind you that I come from France, that I'm a political scientist.
India and Eurasia, that's why this thing.
No, I'm neither a diplomat nor a government official, so you should ask them. Is the question what they could learn or what you all together could share? I'm not quite sure. The answer I can make to you, which I think is appropriate, is that we ought to understand with the word multi that there is something common to large parts of the world and not so present in the case of Europe and in the West. I will come back to that just now. So when there is a multi-something reality, and what word comes after multi is sometimes contentious, whether it's multilingual, multi-ethnic, multicultural, multi-religious, whatever. What comes after multi is touchy in human perceptions, but in the conceptual terms, it matters less than the multi. Whether you keep the multi or whether you try to do away with the multi, that's the issue. So as far as I understand of India, I'm very ignorant about India, but you've kept the multi in many, many ways, and they have too. So in that sense, it's not an issue as well. And in fact, if you look at the countries which we are mentioning, China, Russia, and the others, they're all multi, officially or not, multinational in China officially, Russia, I suspect, to some extent too. So it's not an issue as well. So so that's my answer to you. Now, when it comes to democracy, I'm not willing to open the discussion on democracy, because if we do, we'll come up with multiple definitions, imperfect ones, and the debate will change from geopolitics or regime dynamics or historical evolutions to details of implementation of ideals. So we are talking about ideals or ideas or concepts or historical evolutions. Are we half an hour late?
Yeah, we're done. Yeah, we have a minute. Yes, in case you want a minute. But you want a minute?
No. I think that after 3 days together, you are more encouraged. I mean, you're more than encouraged to actually bring in more Indian views into this room. This course, the purpose of it, if I go back to the basics, is to understand to what extent there is a new Asia in the making, which I call the Shanghai Cooperation, not just the organization, but the whole context, and to what extent India is interested, willing, active, or attentive, and waiting and seeing what happens in terms of that. And the answers that have come to you to that question already, whether you're aware of it or not, is the fact that some alternative dynamic is more important than the SEO. It's the BRICS, or maybe some others. So this is what I'd like you to tell me about in the coming day. So, because tomorrow we go into the institutional aspects, and then we go into the economic and military dimensions of the Shanghai Cooperation. So we go into more technical things. But for next week, you should be preparing this. And also there will be an essay to write at some point. So, okay.
Thank you, Professor Chawal.
Thank you.
Very, very contributing. Thank you very much for your presence here.
Oof.
I've done the homework.
That was too much. Oh, you have already?
Yeah, I've
okay.
completed this. Tomorrow again we are going to meet.
Accession started and membership since. So in the bracket there are membership since.
Yeah.
After this, and in the case of Belarus, what happened is.
So wait. Okay, this is confirmation of what I said.
I have checked everything. It's fine.
Yes.
In the case of Belarus,